Today's presentation is titled Big Legislative Changes, What You Need to Know to Meet the New Challenges. I'm Kate Klaus, staff attorney and FDA specialist in Medmarc's Risk Management Department, along with Sarah Dyson, Assistant Vice President Risk Management, who will be moderating our Q&A session. And on behalf of Medmarc and today's presenter, Stephen Needleman, thank you for joining us. Stephen Needleman serves as lead quality systems and compliance consultant to the FDA and Life Sciences practice team at King & Spalding, specializing in regulatory, enforcement, and policy matters involving industries regulated by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. He provides strategic advice, insight, and guidance to the medical device, pharmaceutical, biologic, and food industries to ensure compliance with the requirements of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Mr. Needleman consults with manufacturers, importers, and new product developers, as well as with firms involved in or facing enforcement actions. He helps firms develop corrective action plans and provides training and guidance to industry professionals on all FDA requirements, including quality system regulations, inspection preparedness, post-market obligations, and executives management responsibilities. Mr. Needleman retired from the Food and Drug Administration in 2006 after a 34-year distinguished career, where he served as the Deputy Associate Commissioner for Regulatory Affairs and as Chief Operating Officer of the Office of Regulatory Affairs. He ensured consistent interpretation of FDA's regulatory policies by directly overseeing offices at the headquarters of the Office of Regulatory Affairs, including the Office of Regional Operations, the Office of Enforcement, and the Office of Criminal Investigations. Before joining the Office of Enforcement, Mr. Needleman spent nearly 24 years throughout the Office of Compliance at FDA's Center for Devices and Radiological Health in a number of management positions. During those nearly 24 years at CDRH, he was responsible for implementing many of the newly created statutory requirements and drafting and shaping many of the regulations and policies affecting the sale, distribution, and promotion of medical devices. With that, I am pleased to turn things over to Steve, who will begin today's presentation.
Thank you, Kate, for that very kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me to talk to you today about the new legislative changes that are ongoing at FDA that really need to that you need to keep your finger on the pulse of new guidances, new directives, and new information that will be forthcoming from FDA. Much of the new legislation, quite frankly, that was passed this past summer in August of 2017 actually does provide industry greater transparency, predictability on how FDA conducts inspections, and it provides you a greater insight as to how they decide which site will be inspected within a given year, et cetera. So today we're going to focus on the impact of the FDA Reauthorization Act, fondly known as FDARA, on the medical device industry, which is also known as the Medical Device User Fee Amendments 4 and MEDUFA 4, so two acronyms associated with this act. And we're going to talk about the current status of 21st century cures, 21cc as it's often referred to, the implementation of the medical device requirements. As you may know, 21st century cures affects not just devices, but it also affects pharmaceuticals, biologics, and other medically oriented provisions, including bioresearch monitoring and various clinical study aspects of it. So the FDA Reauthorization Act of 2018 was signed into law by President Trump last August. There was a lot of hype around it before its signing, including the statements about including multi-million-dollar user fees for the pharmaceutical industry, especially because of various cost containment issues, profit motives, et cetera, which really has not yet materialized through this round of FDA authorizations or legislation. The FDARA contains user fee reauthorizations for the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, the medical device, the generic drug, and the biosimilar user fee acts. All of them are contained in this consolidated reauthorization known as FDARA. It also contains provisions regarding drug development, drug access, generic drug access, et cetera. But today's focus is going to be solely on the medical device industry. So as we look at MDUFA 4, as you can well expect, there will be significant increases to meet statutory revenue amounts on user fees. User fees are really critical to the continued operation at FDA, the Center for Devices. It provides and ensures timely reviews of applications, whether it be 510Ks, PMAs, de novos, et cetera, and it ensures the constant money necessary to staff consistently so that applications are processed in as timely a manner as possible. As many of you may know, FDA is quite a bit underfunded through by Congress, and these user fees enable FDA to have some level of stability to have adequate staff on hand to meet the needs of various rates of applications that do come through its doors. So there were some significant fee increases to meet the statutory revenue amounts, and these fiscal year 2017 to 18 amounts were somewhat substantial in certain areas. Establishment registrations increased 37%, PMA supplements were a third increased, and 510Ks, and this is really a big one because most products come to market through the 510K process. There was a 125% increase in user fees associated with 510Ks. In the past, there hadn't been user fees associated with de novo submissions. Now there is such a user fee. It's 30% of the PMA base fee that will be attributed for when you submit a de novo decision submission. Small businesses do continue to get a break on 510K fee increases. They get an increase of only half, 12.6% from fiscal year 2017 to 2018. But the 33% increase on PMA-related user fees continues, and there's no reduction for establishment registration fees for small businesses. And as well, the statutory requirement does apply an inflation adjustment to the user fees every year, including fiscal year 18. So I have just included for your information for future reference the user fees negotiated by MDUFA 4. As you can see, in the middle column is MDUFA 3. So you can see I've highlighted in bold some of the more substantial increases on PMAs, BLAs from $234 to $310,000, 510Ks from $4,690 to over $10,000, de novos from none to $310,000, and then BLA efficacy supplements $234 to $310,000 as well. So keep those as a future reference. Again, these were negotiated between industry and FDA. That negotiation process is a multi-year process. It's not something that's done overnight, and there has to be agreement by all parties going forward. So the device provisions in FDARA are quite enlightening. They do provide industry greater insight into FDA's thinking. It does provide some relief to industry in various areas as well, but it puts a lot FDA to issue guidances by certain deadlines and time frames so that industry understands FDA's thinking in these different areas. So first and foremost is industry often wonders how does FDA decide who's going to be inspected and when? How is that work plan developed? What is it based upon? What are the criteria that decides whether or not you're one of the fortunate few to get inspected by FDA this year or perhaps next year? So the risk-based schedule that FDA has developed requires FDA to conduct inspections based upon risk. It has eliminated the statutory requirement to inspect Class 2 and 3 medical device firms every 2 years. That has gone by the wayside. It has been removed from the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Instead, the risk-based approach is the way that FDA will make those decisions going forward. And as they have always done in the past, quite frankly, or at least for the past almost decade, they will take into account a firm's compliance history, whether or not you can depend on faithful responses to warning letters, correspondence, what's their past inspections look like, have they had a pattern of noncompliance, have they been recidivist, or are you good corporate citizens and follow the quality system fairly closely and have not had major problems. They will talk about the history. They will review the history of recalls. Obviously, if you are a firm that has a consistent output of Class 1 recalls, you're going to be viewed a little bit differently than a firm that has had no recalls or a spattering of Class 2 and Class 3 recalls. So history of recalls will also be considered, as well as the inherent risk of the device. If it's a life-sustaining, life-supporting device, obviously it's going to have higher greater concern by FDA, and will escalate your likelihood of being inspected by FDA. And that includes not only the inherent risk of the device, but how novel and how unique is the manufacturing process, or challenging is that manufacturing process to manufacture that device. And if it's one that is high-tech, if it's new or novel, it's something that does require quite a bit of conformance to requirements. FDA will escalate that risk level as well to ensure they have confidence about the devices that you're manufacturing. So inspection frequency and history, whether they will look to see whether there were any FDA inspections in the previous 4 years, whether there have been any foreign government inspections, and as you know, FDA has more frequently, and this is an outcome of the last legislative outcome of the FDA Safety and Innovation Act, FDARA, there is greater interaction between FDA's regulatory partners in foreign countries. So whether or not there were any foreign government inspections that FDA can depend upon as intelligence that they provide some comfort that you're operating okay or you're not. And whether or not you participate in any international device audit programs, for example, the MDSAP program, the Medical Device Single Audit Program. That will also affect FDA's decision in establishing their work plans and deciding whether or not you are worthy of a necessary inspection by FDA during the current year. So also under the inspections is FDA has been ordered to develop uniform processes and standards. It requires them to establish routine standards for how to conduct an inspection, not for cause inspections, not compliance follow-ups, but these are routine inspections, to include exceptions to processes and standards, pre-announcement of routine inspections, which again, FDA has been doing ever since the Medical Device Industry Grassroots Initiative of the late 1990s, early 2000s. And I might add, pre-announcement of inspections is totally unique to the medical device industry. Again, not done for compliance follow-up or for cause inspections, but routine inspections. They have been pre-announcing their inspections. There is a requirement that they establish what's a reasonable time in advance, notification regarding the type and nature of the inspection ongoing, so that when they come in, you'll know they're scheduled for a routine QSIT, or it's an abbreviated QSIT inspection, quality system inspection technique. They will be able to tell you in advance what kind of inspection they intend to conduct during their visit. They're also going to provide you an estimate of the inspection time frame because of the ongoing concern and the continued dialogue that domestic firms are constantly concerned about the fact that foreign firms are only inspected for 4 to 5 days, that there's an uneven playing field. Even though the statute provides FDA greater flexibility to take action against foreign manufacturers, they want FDA now to provide to you an anticipated inspectional time frame for the duration of the inspection. There's the opportunity for advanced communication regarding working hours and records to be requested, and then regular communication during the inspection regarding the inspection status. As of today, there should be daily updates and daily downloads every night at the conclusion of an inspection or the first thing in the morning based upon the previous day's findings. Many investigators haven't consistently been doing that. I shouldn't say many, but several investigators do not consistently do that. This basically mandates FDA to create guidance for this by February of 2019 that will require investigators to share their findings on a daily basis, so that if there's an opportunity for you to make correction before the end of the inspection, you'll be in much better shape from a liability perspective to be able to address FDA's concerns. Perhaps they asked the wrong person the wrong question. Perhaps the data is there, they just didn't find it or didn't see it. And so this does provide you greater visibility and opportunity to make sure your inspectional outcome is successful. New statutory requirement for FDA to provide feedback on a firm's 483 corrective actions upon request. Again, this is something that industry has often complained about, that FDA receives update upon update upon update only to fall into big black holes. They're not getting feedback on their responses. They're not getting feedback on the adequacy of their responses. Are they on the right track? Are we doing the right things? Are there any questions? Now the statutory requirements will require FDA to provide feedback when requested by a firm, only if that request is timely and that the corrective actions relate to public health priority, systemic or major actions, or emerging safety issues. They need to have a response to you within 45 days after receipt of the request, and feedback is non-binding. That is, if they provide feedback to you that it appears you're going down the right road based upon your written response, upon re-examination or re-audit, they may determine that, in fact, it's not adequate. They may, in fact, determine that you're not doing what you promised you're doing as well, or it's not as thorough as you may have described it in your written response. So the feedback is not binding as far as FDA is concerned, but it should give you a good indication as to whether or not you're operating in the right direction, whether you're going in the right direction or not. This is really an important element of the new statute in that at least it increases FDA's consistency, its visibility to the firm, the ability to get some kind of feedback on your responses. At least you know whether you're going in the right direction or not, especially when in some instances, especially those that are undergoing warning letter remediations or others, where you do monthly or bi-monthly updates, you'll at least know you're not spinning your wheels and going in the wrong direction. FDA also requires FDA to issue draft guidance by February of 2019 regarding their device inspection processes and standards for routine inspections, feedback on corrective actions, standard method for communicating regarding inspections and feedback, standard timeframes for foreign and domestic device inspections occurring over consecutive days, extension upon investigators' identification of a reason to inspect the establishment, and to facilitate the continuity of inspections. So in February of 2019, that's a critical date, expecting a lot of guidance from FDA to cover much of these inspectional transparency issues. The last bullet on practices to facilitate the continuity of the inspections, many in the industry have experienced inspections that begin 1 week, and then investigators don't show up for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. They come back for 3 days. They disappear for 2 weeks again. And before you know it, these inspections develop a life of their own, and they seem like they're indefinite in length. Part of what contributes to that, quite frankly, taken from somebody who used to manage the entire field organization, are the pre-announced inspections where investigators make commitments to firms that they will begin an inspection on such and such a date, only to realize that the inspection they're currently involved with will go longer. So it causes these hiatuses in the inspections that become untimely in closing out, and so untimely and disruptive to a firm that it's really become a significant problem. So FDA will be issuing guidance on how they will handle those issues. They will provide guidance on standard timeframes for conducting routine inspections, communicating regarding inspections and feedback from responses. So this February 18th, 2019 date is critical for expecting guidance from FDA on how they will be implementing much of the inspectional transparency aspects of FDARA. Part of the inspectional authority that also was granted to FDA is that, as it was mentioned in the preamble to the quality system regulation way back in the 1997-98 timeframe, devices are now deemed adulterated if an establishment delays, denies, limits, or refuses an inspection. So what that means is that This is very similar to statutory language that was included in the FDA Safety and Implementation Act of 2012, and that has been applying to the pharmaceutical industry since then. So now, if there's any delay, denial, or refusal of an inspection, your devices are considered adulterated. And there's an existing guidance that was promulgated by the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, circumstances that can constitute delaying, denying, limiting, or refusing a drug inspection, that was published in October of 2014, that now also applies to the medical device industry. It's important that you read this document. It's important to understand FDA's thinking as to what they consider a delay, a denial, or a refusal, or a limitation of an inspection, so that you don't put yourself in an awkward situation where your devices are considered adulterated and potentially subject to enforcement action by FDA. So a few of the examples on delaying an inspection: if all of a sudden you postpone the start of an inspection without any reasonable explanation, you just decide, it's just not convenient for us, that won't carry much water. If there are extenuating circumstances for that postponement, the FDA will certainly consider those. It will, if you leave the investigator without access to documents or records for unreasonable time periods, and this is where it becomes really subjective, and you really need to be careful. Some investigators have been playing that game as it shouldn't take more than 5 minutes to get a record. That's not reasonable either. So you need to set the expectations up front during your opening meeting during an inspection as to how long it reasonably would take to get records. And if you're using off-site storage, such as Iron Mountain or something like that, they need to understand it will take some time to get it. For those of you who negotiated contracts because they were less expensive to get records in 5 to 7 days, I would suggest you rethink those contracts, especially during the time of an FDA inspection, because they will consider that to be a delay of inspection. Records should be available at the longest 48 hours from the time an inspection is started, from the time the request comes in. Most firms are able to turn even off-site storage records in within 24 hours. Limiting an inspection includes discontinuing manufacturing during an inspection or limits direct observation without reasonable explanation. So if you're starting to find things, if they're starting to find things during your inspection and you decide to turn everything off so they can't see anything more, they're going to consider that limiting an inspection. It's going to certainly put you in the situation where the agency could consider you adulterating your product. Also, prohibiting photography without reasonable explanation. This is an age-old argument that the agency and industry has had as to whether or not photography should be permitted during an inspection. I know how we counsel our clients. We're getting to the point where we may need to rethink that. The Inspector's Operations Manual instructs the investigators that if they come across a firm where photography is prohibited, they're to call FDA is to call the general counsel or counsel for the firm to discuss that. Our experience really in the medical device industry is that typically FDA only wants to take copies of labels with those photographs. It's easier than trying to transcribe them, et cetera, and they're really not trying to document terrible conditions as they would at a food firm where they may find rodent droppings, insect infestation, et cetera. So firms, if you have a no photography policy, make sure it's clear during your opening meeting so that FDA understands your expectations, so they don't think it's an ad hoc decision not to permit photography during the inspection. But expect it may come up if they want to take photographs of labels, et cetera. And we always suggest if you decide to allow that, you take photographs of the exact same things that they are. And then similarly, if you unreasonably redact requested documents, it looks like you're hiding information, you're not sharing information. Remember, FDA is covered by the statute under confidentiality. Trade secret information, they're not allowed to share, but they are certainly entitled to. Trade secret confidential information, make sure anything that is shared with FDA is stamped as confidential, and so that they can respect that if an FOI request comes in at some point in the future. So those are some of the inspectional authorities. Another major impact, this is a really big plus for industry, is for many of you who have had their certificates for foreign governments held up because you were receiving a warning letter or your inspection was classified as official action indicated. The agency's longstanding policy was if you received a warning letter based upon a recent quality system inspection, all CFGs would automatically be stalled. They would not be provided until such time as you operate in compliance based upon an FDA inspection. If one actually thinks about it, and as we have often brought to FDA's attention, is we're providing greater assurance to the foreign governments and to the foreign countries that we're so concerned about your product that we're not allowing it to be exported, yet you continue to manufacture it here in the United States while a warning letter is being remediated. So Congress decided it's time to create a pathway for certificate for foreign government issuance. FDA must provide a written explanation of the basis for the CFG denial to identify the finding upon which the denial is based, and it's generally based upon a quality system inspection that did not go well. For denials based on quality system noncompliance, include a substantial summary of the specific grounds for noncompliance, unless the basis is injunction, seizure, Class 1 or 2 recall. So if there is a recall as an outcome of these findings, you will not get much relief for issuance of CFGs. Same thing if you're operating under an injunction or a recent seizure action has been taken against the product. But it does prohibit denials based solely on 483 observations if the firm has agreed to a plan of correction. So now you have an opportunity to present a corrective action plan to FDA for them to consider their denial for your certificate of foreign government. If it's based solely on quality system observations and you have an effective plan in place, and we present it to the agency as to how it will eliminate any of the risks or concerns, FDA needs to consider those kind of submissions in deciding whether or not they can provide you relief for issuance of certificates for foreign governments while you're dealing with an OAI inspection or under a warning letter situation. Again, if you're under an injunction, if there's been a seizure action taken against any of your products, especially the product that you want to be exported, or the Class 1 or 2 recall, this does not apply. Can request and review if there is a denial. If there's a denial of that request, firms can request a review. New information, so it provides due process against their denial, and it gives you the opportunity to continue to provide that, and the opportunity to hopefully get relief under the certificate of foreign government. And again, FDA is required by this summer, August of 18th, to provide guidance. We have approached the agency on at least one client's behalf to obtain relief recently. Jeff Shuren was very supportive, who's the Center Director, of also trying to find a way to provide relief for CFG issuance while a firm is working through its problems, and as long as they have an effective plan in place. So there may be some ad hoc decisions made before this guidance issues that provide some relief, but in the end, this is really, in my opinion, one of the biggest and best elements on a pro-industry perspective as an outcome of FDARA. International recognition, as I mentioned under the last legislation, there's 2012 FDA FDARA. There's been increased communication between FDA's regulators. This legislative change adds statutory permission to recognize auditors used by organizations established by foreign governments. Continue to improve international harmonization of inspectional standards, increase FDA's access to audit data by foreign inspections conducted on behalf of foreign governments. FDA retains the ability to classify those inspections. They do not have to follow the foreign government's determination as to whether or not those inspections are classified consistently with the foreign government. And again, it also now, FDA has long had, since 2002, an FDA-accredited persons program for third-party independent inspections that can be conducted, that are surrogate FDA inspections that are conducted by a limited group of accredited persons, and this legislation just continues the authorization for that authority through 2022. I might add, for all the money that was spent in developing that program back in 2002, I think only about 60 inspections have ever been conducted on the accredited persons program, but nonetheless, Congress continues to reauthorize it going through the next 5-year cycle. So again, continued international harmonization, continued use and dependence on foreign inspectional information, but FDA retains the right to classify those inspections. We're going to see more of that, by the way, as well as medical device single audit program becomes more heavily utilized going forward, as inspectional information is shared among the international bodies, especially those that are participating in the MDSAP audit program. Pediatric devices extends for 5 years the ability to sell pediatric humanitarian use devices at a profit for more than the development and production cost. Again, that extends it for the next 5 years to encourage firms to develop pediatric devices for children's use, so that they collect data for use in pediatric patients, so that people don't just blindly use adult devices on pediatric patients, resulting in injuries. One of the reasons I put this in here is there will be an open public meeting on August 13th and 14th. Registration will be open until August 6th. There will be a webcast of the meeting, but if there is any interest in in developing your device for pediatric use, understanding for pediatric humanitarian use, please attend this meeting, or at least participate in this meeting, get the webcast, find out what's going on and how the issues surrounding pediatric devices will be developing. Alternative pathway to market for medical device accessories. Until now, a medical device accessory automatically took the classification of the device to which it was an accessory to. So even if you had the simplest tubing that was an accessory to a Class 3 device, it became Class 3 by association. That is being rethought. The pathway for classification and reclassification of accessories is going to be based on the accessory's risk, not the parent device. This is very good news for those who manufacture accessories that are often confronted with extensive clinical data, clinical information, only because the device that it's being tied to automatically requires them to get the same level of product clearance. So upon initial classification, you may request separate classification of the parent device and the accessories in your 510K or PMA submission. They do not have to be glommed together in one. The accessories can be classified totally separate and receive their own individual classification. For those that have already been classified associated with the parent device, which has long-standing been the policy of FDA, those manufacturers can request a reclassification of the accessory under the parent device's PMA or 510K. FDA must provide an opportunity to meet before submission of a written request. They need to provide you that opportunity to meet, and they must respond to any request for this within 85 calendar days. If FDA denies that request, they have to provide a detailed justification, and they must publish granted reclassifications in the Federal Register within 30 calendar days. So if a device does become reclassified, downclassified, more likely than anything, they need to publish that within 30 days of that reclassification. And every 5 years, FDA must publish a proposed list of Class 1 accessory types to keep that current and provide the opportunity for accessory manufacturers to come to market as a Class 1 device, perhaps 510K exempt, perhaps, and depending upon the device, quality system exempt as well. Report on quality, safety, and effectiveness of servicing medical devices. For those of you who were involved, the FDA issued a Federal Register announcement in March of 2016 requesting comment on refurbishing, rebuilding, remarketing, and servicing of medical devices, mostly by third-party providers. This was an issue that was raised by many OEM manufacturers, claiming that their service departments and service requirements were held to a different standard than the third-party providers. Third-party providers did not have to follow quality system requirements, did not have to file MDR reports, etc. FDA then followed that up with an open public workshop on October 27th and 28th of 2016, based upon the same topic, had involvement of industry, FDA representatives, trade associations, biomedical engineers, service providers, etc. Until just several weeks ago, there was absolutely no output as a result of either the comments to the Federal Register or to that open public meeting. FDARA required the agency to issue a report on the outcome of those activities. It was due May 15th of this year, and that report just recently issued on May 15th, 2 weeks ago. Based upon that information that was presented, that was discussed at the open public meeting, comments received, and FDA's own evaluation of objective evidence, they determined that there's not sufficient evidence to conclude whether there is widespread public health concerns related to servicing by third-party providers that would justify imposing any additional or different regulatory requirements than currently exist. The objective evidence that was reviewed indicated that both the original equipment manufacturers as well as third-party providers provided high-quality, safe, and effective servicing, and FDA could not conclude or could not find, based upon objective evidence that was presented or in their files, that there's a widespread public health concern related to third-party providers, service providers. So as such, the status is the status quo. Things have not changed. There will still be OEMs be held to conformance to the quality system regulations as part of your quality system at your firm, and MDR reporting, complaint investigations, et cetera, will continue to be required. Third-party providers at this time will continue to operate as they're currently operating. FDA does propose as an outcome of that, in that announcement on May 15th, that third-party providers adopt quality management principles, clarify the difference between servicing and remanufacturing, which is often confusing by industry, and they will provide that clarification. There is a growing concern, as many of us are aware of, not just in the medical device industry, but day-to-day lives, cybersecurity practices associated with servicing of medical devices, needing to take into account the importance of cybersecurity, and that forces evidence development to assess the quality and effectiveness of medical devices. So it's really business as usual, not really any changes per se. They will be developing quality management principles for those providers. A new wrinkle over-the-counter hearing aids. It's not a wrinkle, it's really a plus, especially for those of us who are in the aging categories. FDARA creates a category for over-the-counter hearing aids intended for 18-year-olds and older who have mild to moderate hearing impairment. The agency will propose regulations establishing a new classification category of OTC hearing aids. It needs to be published before August of 2020. It will provide reasonable assurance about the safety and effectiveness of these devices, requirements for labeling, and a determination about whether the OTC hearing aids will require a 510K or not. And that FDA must now update and finalize its existing guidance distinguishing between hearing aid devices and personal sound amplification products such as hearing loops. It may be interesting to note that way back in 1976, when the medical device amendments were first published, hearing aids were the first restricted device by regulation, and those regulations were published shortly after the medical device amendments because of such concerns associated with the safety of hearing aids, the marketing principles associated with hearing aids, et cetera. So it's really emphasis on the hearing aid industry. It also requires that any state law is preempted by FDARA, on the OTC hearing aids. So whatever FDA comes up with will continue to be the rule of thumb. Other FDARA device provisions: 510K clearance and PMA approval for medical imaging devices where it's intended for use with a contrast agent in a manner different from the contrast agent's labeling, so that you can get clearance for that imaging device when you're using a contrast agent that was not originally intended for use with that device, and that you can now get that through 510K or PMA clearance. And then there are several pilot projects to improve post-market surveillance activities in different areas that are ongoing, utilizing and better incorporating UDI data, et cetera. So I've included a chart of the actions required by FDARA that FDA still has forthcoming, so that will be useful for you to know when the target dates are for the different things. We're going to spend a little bit of time on 21st century cures. 21st century cures was President Obama's final legislation that he signed into law in December of 2016, shortly before he left office. It was a major set of compromises that was patched together and attached to unrelated legislation when it passed. It affects drugs, devices, biologics, clinical studies, etc. The lobbyists and senators blasted controlled clinical trial requirements as too restrictive, too cumbersome, and has prompted this continuing dialogue that's even ongoing today. There were just hearings a week ago about real-world evidence and right-to-try paradigms, minimizing dependence on clinical data, and providing the availability of investigational products, new and novel products, to patients, especially in last resort situations, to provide them some level of comfort, some level of promise, et cetera, going forward. There were just hearings last week with regard to right to try for last resort patients. Congress was supportive of it, and I believe they passed legislation in that direction. It eliminated some FDA controls on the devices. It sought to speed approvals of devices and to press FDA to accept foreign data for clinical studies. The different portions of 21st century cures come under subtitle F as it applies to medical devices. As you can see, it deals with breakthrough devices, humanitarian device exemption, recognition of standards, certain Class 1 and Class 2 devices, classification panels, institutional review board flexibility, CLIA waiver improvements, least burdensome device review, a term that came up as early as 1997. Again, least burdensome, a term that somehow or other either quickly gets forgotten or is not well understood. It provides for cleaning instructions and validation data requirements and clarifying medical device software regulation. So I'm not going to go into all of these subparts. I'm going to provide you some highlights of what has been done and is ongoing at FDA today. They have established a breakthrough device pathway. They have changed the humanitarian device limit to 8,000 patients from 4,000 patients, enabling more patients to have access to humanitarian devices with the exemptions that are provided by the humanitarian device exemption pathway for device approval. It did provide a streamlined process. They have provided a streamlined process of 510K exemptions. They have made some modifications to the classification panels and does allow for centralized IRBs. They've updated the CLIA waiver guidance. They've recognized standards in different areas. They have trained and audited least burdensome of ODE reviewers to make sure that they're following these policies and procedures. Something that was never envisioned ages ago, they've clarified the medical software regulation, and then they do talk about cleaning and validation data for medical devices. So specifically, one of the big areas that was often become an unknown because of its quick involvement and more dependence on is digital health. So 21st century cures clarified that certain digital health technologies, clinical administrative support software, mobile apps that are just about your wellness or encouraging a healthy lifestyle, they fall outside the scope of FDA regulation. They are low risk but provide good benefits to the public health. They provide you a good sense of knowledge about your ongoing health on a day-to-day basis. So FDA issued a 510K software modification guidance on October 17th that clarifies the policy on digital health. They also issued a draft guidance in April of 2018, just last month, on devices with multiple software functions. And these are devices where some functionalities fall outside the scope of FDA regulation, but not all of them do. So some of them would fall under, for example, the healthy lifestyle part, but then other aspects of that device are required to be regulated by FDA. So FDA, when they issued that regulation, that guidance, did not limit the scope to only cover 21st century cure mandates. Therefore, any manufacturer that includes both FDA-regulated device software functions and non-FDA-regulated device software functions need to really read that draft guidance, understand it fully so that you know how it impacts your firm. FDA 21st Century Cures provides that when there is a multifunction device and at least one function that meets the definition of device and one that does not, FDA is prohibited from regulating the non-device software as a device. However, FDA can assess the impact of the non-device function on the device function. So if it has an impact, if it can deleteriously affect that device function, FDA has the right to pull that in as being have a causative impact on that device function. And then FDA's draft guidance, multiple function device products, policy and considerations, follows the principles of 21st century cures. For those who are involved in digital health, I really strongly suggest that you read this guidance. It will be helpful. It's fairly clearly well written. Under the Breakthrough Device Program, and drugs had one of these for several years, the FDA Center for Devices is committed to fulfill the need for certainly breakthrough devices as quickly as possible and get them to the market as quickly as possible. They issued a draft guidance regarding the Breakthrough Device Program. It builds on a program that was established in 2015 on expedited access pathway program that was created earlier. It's intended to help patients. These are devices that are intended to help patients have more timely access that will effectively diagnose or treat life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating diseases or conditions for which there are no approved alternatives available, or they offer a significant advantage over currently approved or cleared medical devices. So again, life-threatening, irreversibly debilitating diseases or conditions for which there are no alternatives available, or the new device has such significant advantage over existing FDA-cleared or approved alternatives. Provides for a more agile pre-submission process. They much more complex to assess. They're encouraging earlier and more frequent interaction with FDA on these breakthrough technologies, so that they can, both FDA and the manufacturer can make the most efficient use of resources to get these to the market as quickly as possible. And this is a Jeff Shuren slide, actually, that he presented recently at MedCon and I believe at the Food and Drug Law Institute annual meeting. So here's his chart on breakthrough device pathways, and the draft guidance was issued October 25th, 2017. But to date, 65 devices have been accepted into the program, and the first device was approved in December of 2017. So it's obviously it's a fairly quick turnaround. It's certainly advantageous to the public health. It's certainly advantageous to any one of us who can be a patient in any given day going forward. 510K modifications, as we all know, many devices undergo significant modifications from their original inception once they come to market based upon feedback from the medical community, from patients, from others to improve the device's performance. FDA, there's always been confusion about modifications to existing 510K cleared devices. As many of you know, FDA did finalize two guidance documents in October 2017 to help determine when a new pre-market notification is needed to affect illegally marketed devices when modifications are made. The guidance documents help introduce iterative changes that can improve a product safety and performance by providing more predictable, consistent, and transparent criteria for when FDA will need to review these changes. I know it's often foggy as to when FDA will or will not make these changes. Often there's claim creep. Often there's iterative changes that after a while become more substantive changes. This guidance helps clarify when a new 510K is needed and helps clarify the mystification associated with it. It does not change FDA's review standard, but it does provide better predictability from an agency perspective as to what is expected of you and the agency's thinking on it. Least burdensome device review. Again, 21st Century Cure expands the least burdensome provisions. This term has been used for many, many years now. It's often misunderstood. Perhaps it's not the best term to be used. But least burdensome shall be integrated into all device reviews, other device-related activities, not just select pre-market activities. FDA has revised this guidance with regard to properly responding to deficiencies with least burdensome principles so that you don't keep going through more than you need to get to provide the data and the information that FDA is requesting. And FDA will again issue a new guidance on this to make review process more efficient. They have been doing extensive training of their employees so that everybody's on the same page with regard to least burdensome principles. 510K exemptions, again under 21st Century Cures. FDA exempted more than 70 Class 1 devices and 1,000 Class 2 device types from pre-market notification. That's a big relief for industry as far as the need to submit 510Ks. Device types that are exempt from 510K are not generally exempt from other regulatory controls such as quality system requirements, MDR reporting, registration and listing, etc. And understand that some Class 1 devices are exempt from the quality system regulation. But by exempting these devices, it provides FDA the ability to cover the landscape more effectively on more significant devices, spend greater amount of time on reviewing PMAs and more important devices that are coming to market. 21st Century Cures provided FDA to provide instructions for use and validation regarding cleaning, disinfecting, and sterilization for certain reusable devices such as duodenoscopes. As you remember, the duodenoscopes created a problem a couple of years ago with infections resulting in some deaths. And FDA in June of 2017 published a list of reusable devices for which requirement applies to provide instructions for use and validation data regarding the cleaning, disinfecting, and sterilization of those devices. And this requirement applies to pre-market requirements to make sure that these are reviewed by FDA upon clearance. This is a schedule similar to what I did on FDARA, 21st Century Cures implementation. These are the different guidances that were completed. I suggest you be familiar with them. They do affect your day-to-day operations. They do provide you greater guidance, and FDA's thinking in these different areas is mostly, a great part of them are on the pre-market side versus the post-market side. So in summary, be prepared, stay on top of draft guidance documents, and submit comments when appropriate. It's your opportunity to be heard. Be familiar with those changes. Those are the agency's thinking, and you will be held accountable to that document or the agency's thinking. Guidance does not have the effect of law or regulation, but do convey the agency's thinking, and you do not have to necessarily follow it per se. There are alternative approaches that may be just as robust, but be prepared to justify those so that if FDA challenges the scientific soundness of those alternatives, you're prepared to be able to defend your decision to go a route a little bit different than what FDA has identified. So there are a lot of moving parts ongoing. There's a lot of new guidances. There's a lot of new activity going on throughout the agency. There's a lot of new congressional mandated timeframes for issuance of these guidances, especially under FDARA. Pin those dates on your calendar, especially February of 2019, August of 2018 this year as well for the CFG guidance. They're important to your continued success, and will hopefully, if conformance with them, will keep you out of the crosshairs of FDA. So with that, I will open the opportunity for any questions.
Thank you, Steve. That was great. It sounds like there's a lot of changes in store for us, and I really appreciate you making sense of them for us. So we are going to turn to questions. If you have a question that you want to submit, use the Q&A panel located at the bottom right of your screen. After typing your questions in the space at the bottom, hit the send button, and please be sure to direct your questions to all panelists in the Ask menu. Your questions will not be seen by the audience, but we will be able to field them for you. So, Steve, let's turn to the first one. How will the new requirements in FDARA change the way FDA currently determines who will be inspected?
So, it really doesn't change much. I have to be honest, FDA has had a longstanding risk-based approach to how they identified who is going to be inspected within a given year. That's aside for fault cause audits, complaint investigations, unforeseen issues. FDA has often used the very same characteristics and requirements that are established by FDARA. It's just that now FDARA basically codifies them. It requires them to follow those specific requirements. So there's not going to be much of a change. They've been following this premise for a while. They never had the resources for many, many years to be able to complete the biennial inspection process anyhow for Class 2 and Class 3 devices. So for many years now, they've been addressing their work plan assignments through a risk-based approach.
Okay, great. All right, I have another one for you, Steve. Will the inspectional changes impact those firms that are using MDSAP?
So it really shouldn't. For those that are MDSAP firms that are dealing through their notified bodies and their authorized representatives that are conducting those inspections, you're going to be dealing mostly with those guys. Now, if you have a significant number of Level 4 or Level 5 findings as a result of that MDSAP program, again, the accredited authorized representatives will be dealing with you to assure effective addressing of those findings. But those findings do get, when it gets to more than a certain number of Level 4 or Level 5 findings, they are shared with FDA. So at some point, you may get the attention of FDA if they feel that the authorized auditing body is not addressing those properly, or you have not addressed them properly yourselves. But the premise under MDSAP is basically to keep you within MDSAP. The premise is for the authorized auditing body to provide some level of control over you, and that among the different regulatory bodies, they will be sharing this information, and that, again, it will be kept sort of outside the scope of FDA.
Okay, next one. Can we currently request relief for obtaining CFGs if we are operating under a warning letter?
So we've approached the agency on 2 occasions now to provide relief, and I believe we recently got relief in one situation. We had a very effective corrective action plan. We were able to establish that we thought it was in everybody's best interest that the relief be provided. I know there's interest by Jeff Shuren, who's the Senate Director, to not just wait for this guidance, but I can't say with certainty whether or not that's going to be consistently upheld going forward. Again, August 18th is not that far away, all things considered, and it's really another 8 weeks or so. And, hopefully everybody will be able to better understand FDA's thinking and the requirements to get relief for CFGs. If a warning letter issues, assuming there's no injunction, seizure, Class 1 or 2 recall ongoing, and you have an effective corrective action program that will be convincing to FDA that you're addressing their concerns.
Okay, Steve, I think we have time for one more, but it's a 3-part question.
Okay.
So how do we confirm our medical device accessory is a Class 1? And what is the simplest way of registering a Class 1? And does it still need a 510K?
So Class 1 devices, for the most part, do not need 510Ks. Number two, as far as registration and listing, it's just a normal, you need to still, even though you're a Class 1 device, you still need to register and list with FDA under the FERLS database. You need to pay the registration fee. You need to register your device, list the device, the brand names under which it's sold, where it's manufactured, et cetera. And then you can look at FDA's database to see if your accessory has yet been reclassified into a certain category of Class 1 device. They should be some federal registers around that. You can absolutely, I would suggest you contact, if there's some confusion, CDRH's ombudsman, who may be able to provide you further clarity or direction in that area. And their name and number are available on FDA.gov's website. Look under medical devices in the table of organization, and you should be able to find that. Each device is going to be handled a little bit differently, but it does at least provide relief for those accessory manufacturers that have been tied to parent devices that do not require the extent or the amount of information that historically has been required just because of association with a parent device.
Great. Well, thank you, Stephen. Thank you for your presentation. I'm going to be thinking of you all year as these new things come online. I really appreciate your explanation of them. And I want to thank our listeners for joining us today. Again, thank you for joining us. This concludes today's presentation.